So the Warhammer 40K narrative has moved forward. Let's talk about some traitor tech priests worshipping the Void Dragon, how the Ultramarian Reclamation is going to retake the 500 worlds, and a Necron threat quite so disturbing that it preys on the horror and might that are other tomb worlds themselves. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today I thought we'd take a video to go over the latest current narrative updates to Warhammer 40k. Taking a look at the 500 worlds narrative, Titus vs Nekrosor Ammentar, and with some Admech and Catan intrigue thrown in. The events of this unfold in Ultramar, basically the realm that's ruled over by the Ultramarines in the galactic southeast. It was Guilliman's previous seat of power and state building during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy, and prior to the Primarch's return was governed from Macragge by Marneus Calgar. Compared with most of the Imperium, it's an unusually productive, civilized and well-defended realm of Imperial space, but that's also meant that it's been the target of multiple great invasions, perhaps single most notably the emergence of the Tyranids and Hive Fleet Behemoth crushing Macragge itself, and the recent Plague War storyline where Mortarion and the Death Guard assailed the sector in an enormous way, only being turned back by Rebute Guilliman and assisted by the divine might of the Emperor in a battle that took him into the Garden of Nurgle itself. In the wake of this recent calamitous invasion, Guilliman has now decreed that he wants the realm of Ultramar restored and expanded. Xenos, Chaos and Renegade forces have shrunk the realm over the many millennia in which he was out of action, and now wishes for his chapter and their sons to retake the borders and expand the realm out to the 500 worlds of old. Leading the way for this, as we know, is Captain Titus himself. He's back in Ultramar after fighting to the galactic west of Terra. The former captain served as a Black Shield in the Death Watch for some time, which led up to the campaign in the Space Marine 2 games. Restored to the rank of Ultramarines Lieutenant, he fought and overcame the Tyranids of Hive Fleet Leviathan and the Thousand Suns that threatened the Residius system west of Terra, fighting in the Fourth Tyrannic War that shook the Bastior subsector. After that, he had the supposedly one-way mission to eliminate a Tzeentch sorcerer in a secret level animation, which despite little support he managed to survive and save his old friend and mentor Matoris in the process. And then since this, Titus has been fighting in many battles in the Bastior subsector, winning notable great victories and being the personal end of several notable Tyranid abominations that had plagued various planets, his prowess both recognised by Marneus Calgar and Guilliman himself. In the wake of this, following the demise of Captain Acheran, Titus was promoted to 2nd Company Captain, the Master of the Watch, typically charged with the defence of the borders of Ultramar, and with the fighting of the Tyrannic War grinding into a stalemate it seems, Guilliman has dispatched the captain back to take an overall central role in the Ultramarian Reclamation to retake the 500 worlds of old. We saw that in Games Workshop's snazzy animation of his promotion ceremony in front of the 2nd Company. Titus's monologue believing that the Primarch's task is a near impossible one, but Titus will strive to achieve it nonetheless, because only in death does duty end. To accompany him in this effort, Titus has his Wardens of Ultramar to back him up. He fights alongside veteran Sergeant Matoris, his mentor who starred in the secret level animation, and certainly a mighty champion in his own right, and also Gadriel of the Space Marine games, now bearing the banner of the 2nd Company. He was promoted to this station after the demise of the previous Ancient, and his bombastic oratory inspired some Imperial Guards to hold a key gate in a battle on the Bastior front. They're also accompanied by a whole bunch of notable mortals, and the 7 of these make up the new model set that Games Workshop's selling for them. There's a fleet master called Gaius Silver, a legate of the Ultramar Defence Force, so basically the Astra Militarum equivalent in Ultramar, and apparently she tries to apply the Codex Astartes as best she can to the formations under her command. There's a diplomat and an envoy who attempts to smooth over the reintegration of worlds that might be a bit more willing than others, and a famed proficient astropath who allows Titus to communicate across the sector and coordinate with other invasion fronts elsewhere. As part of this whole narrative, some mighty heroes have fallen though. Captain Acheran, the guy who gives you your orders in the Space Marine 2 games, and Brother Chiron, who you fight alongside, both have been reportedly laid low. Apparently their last battle had them dispatched to a system called the Pyremote system, a supposedly loyal Imperial world that was holding out well against the Tyranid invasions, and they led a small force of Astartes to investigate the disappearance of an Imperial vessel and their Mordian Iron Guard, Chiron serving as Acheran's lieutenant at this point. They uncovered a gene-stealer cult in the planet's primary hive, who upon their discovery decided to set their plan into motion, and Acheran dispatched a mission to seal the hive away from the rest of the planet, lowering its defences to put it into lockdown, but basically sealing them in with an endless tide of Xenos cultists. His actions likely saved the planet from certain doom, but it seems at the expense of every single Space Marine that landed on the world. The sources that have talked about them so far said that they were slowly worn down in a series of desperate battles. Acheran, Chiron and their brothers were all slain, dragged down and torn apart one by one, and when Imperial reinforcements eventually landed on the world to avenge their brothers, no Space Marines were left standing. Unfortunately, it does seem that as off-camera deaths in Warhammer 40k go, this one does seem quite convincing, and seems kind of hard to see how they could mysteriously survive this one. It does seem that they're probably gone for good. All of this is basically the preamble and setup to 500 Worlds Titus, the lore book for Games Workshop's latest narrative campaign, which basically tells us the way that the Ultramarine Reclamation is unfolding so far, and this one mainly focuses on the Ultramarines forces, Nekrosor Ammentar's Cursed Legion and their way of operating, and then how Titus and these twisted Necrons fight in a desperate battle over the planet of Novamagnor. Before we jump into it properly though, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in WarMag. They're a UK based maker of affordable magnetic transport for miniatures, selling in the UK and EU across their websites, and expanding their offering to the USA fairly shortly. For their main offerings, they've got a bunch of different things. They've got some high grip sticky magnets that can go under bases, really quite easy to apply, and aim to give a flush fit under Citadel ones, usually around £5 or so per sheet of them, and multi-buyers get some discounts. They're quite easy to cut to size as well around other things that you might find under bases. Their other primary offering are their storage box sets, basically giving all-in-one style bundles for really useful boxes and the magnetic sheets that you can put inside them. They've got a huge amount of different ones on offer, depending on the size of the models you want to transport. I feel like this double-decker one is quite an unusually good one though, giving you 2 layers of storage in one with the magnetic sheets to attach to them. Otherwise they sell the magnetic sheets in themselves and have a few fun themed ones that are a bit more stylish than the plain black ones. They're fairly easy to cut to size. But they do have the super cheap ones available as well if you're looking to economise. In any case, check them out, link down in the video description if you'd like to take a look over their stuff, and thanks to them for sponsoring this one. Getting back to the Ultramarine Reclamation though, and we have some more details as to how Guilliman's planning to unfold this campaign. Basically he's planned out the overall logistics of it, though won't be taking the helm in person as he's got lots of responsibilities as the Lord Regent of the Imperium from Terra, but essentially Ultramar is to be reclaimed in style, and to do that there's going to be major campaigns conducted by 4 Tetrarchs, each of these having vast amounts of resources deployed to them, are responsible for holding and expanding one front. Guilliman's putting his chapter and wider Ultramar on full aggressive footing. Every asset is to be mobilised to sweep Ultramar clear of Chaos and Xenos influence, a monumental task that's going to drain vast amounts of resources from the powerful worlds still standing that haven't been ravaged by recent invasion. There's many very mighty foes that are going to stand in the way of this, and then some entire sectors that are more sort of lawless wilderness, that while they might offer less resistance, will still take a vast amount of time, negotiation and resources to properly lay claim to them and garrison them, and start building them up to help the Imperium once more. The Primarch considers it a gamble, as if they should exhaust their forces too much they might leave themselves vulnerable to counterattack, but one that Guilliman considers a necessary one. The 500 Worlds title isn't necessarily a literal number, but more sets a precedent than that sort of region with a bold claim. As the Tetrarchs unfold their campaigns, Titus will have a more central coordinating role, with his forces in the second company ready to deploy to fight the greatest threats and reinforce against Xenos or Chaos incursions that might threaten to cut off the crusading armies on the front lines. The forces of the Ultramarines are pretty mighty indeed. The Tetrarchs themselves are the first Captain Acheran, an old and experienced general and the captain of the first company for the Ultramarines, Captain Decimus Felix, whose lore has been explored a fair bit in novels, and then 2 of the captains of the Ultramarine successor chapters, with Captain Porton of the Genesis chapter and Captain Balthus of the Doom Eagles. A good chunk of the Ultramarines chapter strength is here, but in terms of notable names, many of their greatest heroes are fighting elsewhere. As well as Acheran and Felix, it's mainly the other captains taking up the mantle here: Titus, Fabian, Uriel Ventris, Araios and Talos. Guilliman and Cato Sicarius are fighting on the Indomitus Crusade, Calgar reportedly taking a longer and bloodier route back to Ultramar, and Chaplain Cassius fighting to the galactic southeast against the Tyranids. With much of those captains' companies present though, that's still a pretty mighty amount of Ultramarines around, even if they have been stretched rather thin, first fighting Mortarion in the Plague Wars, which took a great toll, and then immediately having much of their chapter called away to fight the Tyranids in the 4th Tyrannic War that kicked off 10th edition. It does seem that much of the Ultramarine strength is no longer critically needed there, and implies that the stalemate is at least holding so far in the Bastion subsector, even if Games Workshop hasn't developed and expanded on that story in a more focal way yet. Then beyond that, they have any other forces in Ultramar. Last Legion is essentially their Imperial Guard, the Ultramar Defense Auxilia, and then many more Space Marine chapters as well, with 9 Shield chapters being present. These Shield chapters are genetic successors of the Ultramarines. They do have rather a lot of them, given the strength of their Legion being rather left intact during the Horus Heresy. Most of these have had their backstory explored to a greater or lesser extent previously in the 40k lore. Just for a few hints and flavours of them, the Sons of Arar take inspiration from a possibly mythical captain and tend to use more stealth tactics than the average Ultramarines. The sides of the Emperor stood guard over Sotha and have fought the Tyranids around the Pharos device before that was thought to lure them to the galaxy. The Novamarines are a fleet-based chapter and quite well suited to patrolling the boulders of Ultramar as a result. The Reborn are a Primaris era chapter with a flair for armoured warfare, The Silver Skulls put great stock in librarians to guide them, and are unusually brutal at clearing out entrenched enemies at close quarters, and the Sombre Doom Eagles, who have a great acceptance of their potential death in warfare, which often helps them pull off fearsome bold movers throwing their jump pack units into the fight. The Ultramarian Reclamation is being fought on 4 primary fronts. Acheran commands the Conor front to the north, that's beset by an Orc pirate kingdom under Admiral Gorbog, but Acheran's masterful command is seeing a lot of success with a slowly advancing front line, supported by powerful attacks to counter the biggest threats. The Andamung front is under Captain Portion of the Genesis chapter. Orcs and Nurgle forces are active here, plus an Alpha Legion conspiracy to overthrow a world and turn it against the chapter. Portan was able to see through the lies of the nobles though. The Vespator front is under Captain Decimus Felix. Both Necrons and Death Guard have been encountered here, and there's a slightly horrific description of Flayed Ones and Poxwalkers going head to head, which sounds like that'll be a very gruesome battle when you're flaying the skin off those things. And then on the west there's the Protoss front under Captain Balthus. He's favoured a very aggressive footing, pushing his forces on relentlessly and taxing his supply lines. Necrons and Genestealer cults both having been encountered and fought there. All these theatres of conflict are basically campaigns in their own right though, and bring the Ultramarines into conflicts with all manner of threats that might assail them in the 41st millennium. As we know, one such threat that reared his eastern threat on the Vespator front is Nekrosor Ammentar, a disturbing Necron entity that we hadn't known about so far, as a new creation to their lore. He's thought to be potentially the first of the Destroyers, and the origin of their mysterious curse that jumps from Necron to Necron, infecting them with the need to destroy all life. The Silent King has repressed knowledge of his origins, who is thought to have some sort of involvement with the Triarch before, and direct decrees that he and his twisted kind will be exterminated after he's dealt with the uprising Sotek Imitek. They're currently fighting a great civil war in the Pariah Nexus. They're also being beset by the Imperium and Vashtor there. Like most destroyers, Ammentar leads his forces in the extermination of all life, perhaps unable to stand the living in the wake of the Necrons becoming the deathless constructs that they are, though as basically the Alpha Destroyer, he's often able to maintain periods where he becomes far more lucid and able to construct grand plans, and his ultimate goal is to put the shards of the Nightbringer back together, as he knows that any one Necron Destroyer or even an army of them won't be able to annihilate the living races on a cosmic scale, where the power of a restored Nightbringer unleashed might have some chance. To think of restoring their star gods to their former status is utterly abhorrent to the other Necrons, of course, who would mostly gladly see him destroyed if they were able. Many have no choice but to go along with his plans though. Ammentar's mere presence corrupts the minds of Necrons nearby to a much greater level than regular destroyers, and as a result he's assumed overall command of an enormous horde of Necrons, pushing out on multiple fronts across the galaxy, many of which are more regular Necrons just acting in a similar sort of way to destroyers, though as many as possible have been upgraded to the living weapons that they tend to be. Some Necrons able to keep a hold of their sanity are forcibly converted by his cryptex, and perhaps some more foolish nobles pledge themselves to him willingly, perhaps hoping for power under him in his set of generals called his Oblivion Court. Several of these are able to maintain a bit more overall strategic command when he goes into full murder mode. His new miniature by Games Workshop was quite a fun and well received one, maybe looking most like a boosted Ophidian destroyer, though having elements of both the Hexmark and the Scorpeck as well. The creepy disease looking at asymmetry was rather fun too. Ammentar's Cursed Legion, as it's known, is very different to most Necron forces as a result, the bulk of the elites being destroyers, with a maddening curse that even the Necrons don't know how it spreads. Outside of his forces, other overlords employ them more as dynastic shock troopers, but they're the core elite of the army here. Flayed Ones are drawn to the army more often than other Necron dynasties, blood-crazed Necrons with a different sort of curse, afflicted by a mind virus created by the demise of the Catan known as the Flayer. They feel the need to shred and wear the flesh of their enemies, can slip in and out of a pocket dimension, and often appear at Necron battles when there's great slaughter happening, which Ammentar's forces are only too delighted to deliberately commit in the hopes of summoning more of them. Then amongst his forces there's a great number of Catan shards. Ammentar has many shards of the Nightbringer at his disposal and can deploy many en masse across the world when he needs to. Despite his worship and veneration of the Nightbringer, he has still chosen to keep the shards of it bound and constrained to his will for now, and unleashes them in a similar sort of way to other Necron overlords, hovering reapers of death that very few more normal foes can overcome. As the Nekrosor fights across the galaxy, his Nekrosor Crusades focus on 2 major objectives, typically seeking out Necron tomb worlds that are going to be ripe prey, getting himself and his forces into the midst of them, corrupting them to be mindless destroyer killers, perhaps upgrading the residents in the process, and in particular seeking out any further shards of the Nightbringer to further his overall goal. As a result, his primary prey tends to be other Necrons as opposed to the galaxy at large, though with the constant urge to destroy all life, there's not likely to be plenty of collateral damage for any other things on the planet. Now we've got a good idea of the two sides, let's get into how they came into conflict in the War for Novamagnor. Captain Titus and his strike force were deployed to the Vespator front, and they did so to counter a Tyranid splinter fleet that seemed looking to breach the borders of Ultramar, and in particular seemed intent on consuming the agri-world of Idorus, a great world with massive livestock and other biomass that would greatly strengthen its prospects. This world was in the Heliodros system, which also has several other worlds, though none of them quite as important as the thriving industrial world of Novamagnor. The Splinter Fleet made a great attack on Idorus. The Titus and his Ultramarine strike force with the second company weren't too far behind them. In orbit, they led missions to board and detonate the Tyranid bioships up above, and then made landfall planet-size to cull the Tyranid hordes that were butchering the planet's inhabitants and livestock alike, teeming masses of Hormagaunts everywhere to be cleansed, and Titus personally dueling and slaying the Tyranid Prime that seemed to be their leader synapse organism here. The Splinter Fleet was dealt with, and Ultramar's borders were secure once again, but Titus and Command had noticed that the Tyranids had acted very unusually indeed, notably deliberately skirting the world of Novamagnor rather than choosing to assault both worlds in the system, something that Titus had rarely seen, though from his experience in the Death Watch, Titus suspected that this could herald Necron presence in the world, as tomb worlds are often deliberately avoided by the hive mind, perhaps making the calculation that the Necrons are going to be a vast and mighty foe to overcome, and yielding no biomass to make their assault worth it. Novamagnor itself is essentially an imperial colony world that's been gradually gaining more and more strength. Its population and industry have boomed, and it's a productive industrial world and potentially a great asset to the Imperium in that sector, so far having escaped the attention of most of the horrors of Warhammer 40k. Titus' fleet arrives in orbit to find it assailed though. It does indeed appear that the world was a nascent tomb world which is now awoken, much of the planet's surface obscured by strange clouds that seem to have been jamming any communication that the Imperials might have tried to get off-world. Shortly after arriving, the Ultramarines are making preparations to land and assist the defenders, when they suddenly notice an immense Necron warship takes off from the planet's surface, but rather than engaging the Ultramarines that have arrived, it seems intent on bypassing their cordon, only fighting the ships in its way, and appears to have taken a great amount of damage already. Rather than allow unknown Necron forces to escape, Titus and his fleet attack and board the vessel. Notorious and his vanguard cutting through layers of Necron defences and dispatching the commanding overlord, and perhaps for a mighty Necron vessel not encountering as much Necron resistance as you might have expected. At the centre of the Necron's defence is a mysterious artefact, clearly something very important that the Necrons don't want falling into the wrong hands. Titus is sorely tempted to destroy the device, though is advised against it by the Admech Archmagos attached to his feet and Archmagos Oct, who tells him that detonating a potential Necron superweapon like that might give him more than he bargained for, and requests some time to study the artefact and make sure it can be safely disposed of. Titus grudgingly yields to his advice despite having no great love of the Archmagos himself, but he has shown himself to be knowledgeable on countering the technology of Xenos in the past, and is outwardly a rather fanatical Orthodox tech priest who on more than one occasion has denounced other tech priests as heretics and sentenced them to be purged along with the heretical artifacts that they recovered. Secretly, however, Oct is, to put it mildly, a bit of a hypocrite, as he himself has fallen to worship the Necron Catan, believing them to be the living embodiment of the Omnisire. The cult of the dragon has been a shadowy circle in Mars for quite some time, and at many times in 40k lore in the past there's been some hefty hints that a large shard of the Void Dragon lays buried under Mars itself, and perhaps explains the planet's obsession and mastery of technology. Oct chose to attach himself to Titus' fleet in the hope that this very circumstance might arise, the Ultramarian Reclamation almost certainly going to uncover some Necron tomb worlds and needs to deal with them and purge them, and might get him close enough to study some Necron artifacts that could be very hard to obtain otherwise. Not knowing the traitor in their midst, Titus' forces descend to the planet, his strike force deploying by gunship, and below the obscuring clouds the planet's surface is greatly changed. Vast Necron structures have pushed their way to the surface, and in doing so left large rents in the very fabric of the planet itself, great cracks that lead down to bare lava, and others laying bare bits of Necron technology with its rather sickly green glow. Many of these Necron structures seem to be in the process of awakening, sending out forces to fight with the luckless defenders, though the single largest capital structure seems to have been as yet unawakened so far, and Titus designates this site Umbra. Titus, Gadriel and his wardens deployed to the Governor's Command Centre. The planetary governor is a Governor Gallo, and she commands forces from the capital settlements in the First Brand Sprawl. As she expects, the Imperial defenders are having a very hard time of it, facing an enormous assault from a technologically superior Xenos species. Archmagos Oct deploys instead to the Forge Shrine with his Xenotech artifact, and sets about trying to puzzle out its secrets. Believing that they might have a chance for an opportunistic strike, Titus plans to lead a team to detonate Site Umbra with a great vortex bomb, hopefully being able to take out a huge amount of Necrons before they've awoken, as it seems that that site might still be in the process of awakening itself, whereas many of the others are more fully online. On arrival at Site Umbra, Titus' forces arrive to find that it's been assailed. Compared with more normal creepy Necron technology, the technology in this one, it appears like it's malfunctioning or diseased. Many canoptic constructs are lying broken and discarded here, and the actual Necrons themselves lying strewn in piles, though perhaps not quite so clearly damaged. Titus' strike force doesn't have the numbers to dispose of them all properly, so let's to push on as fast as possible to detonate the bomb in the centre of the complex. As they reach their goal, they're ambushed by an onslaught of destroyers. Portals open in the central chamber, and through them leap Ophidian, Scorpeg, and Hexmark destroyers, the Hexmarks rapidly assassinating most of the tech priests that were needed to detonate the bomb. The Ultramarines taking several casualties in this sudden onslaught, fighting to protect the last remaining tech priest, though then Nekrosor Ammentar himself makes an appearance in style, jumping into the fray, and with his ranged weapons annihilating the last tech priest and the blade guard that stood protecting him with its storm shield. With this decisive kill, any hope of detonating the vortex bomb is lost, and Titus' fight now becomes one that's just merely trying to survive and escape. That suddenly becomes significantly harder though, as the Nekrosor's arrival awakens the downed Necrons that were laying strewn across the tomb complex. So not only do the Space Marines have to contend with a core of destroyers, but also a whole bunch of corrupted, newly awakened Necrons throwing themselves into the fight with more conventional weapons. Titus commits his entire might to breaking free of the tomb complex, one full squad of Ultramarines deployed as a desperate rearguard, and selling their lives dearly to hold back the Nekrosor and his core destroyer force. They are slain to a man, and out of Titus' original task force, over half are dead, and the vast majority of the ones that remain are now wounded. After that or rather unsuccessful mission and ambush, Titus and his forces arrive back to the command fortress and find that in their absence the rest of the tomb complex have stepped up the attacks in a massive way. Now the majority of the planet is under very heavy assault from Necrons on all sides, and data transmissions show that at the head of many of the Necron columns are shadowy spectres of death wielding scythes, able to cleave through battle tanks and formations of elites with ease, and their mere presence nearby causes troops to crumble away to dust. What's more, Titus' assault on Site Umbra appears to have awakened that site, and this main central tomb complex, as well as its satellite complexes, now appear to be pouring forth hordes of maddened Necrons. The forces from these ones surging forward in a ceaseless wave of violence, throwing themselves into defended positions, but also placing just as much importance on hunting down stragglers of survivors, apparently easily distracted by their quest to eradicate all life, no matter whether it's a threat or not. The forces from this complex are particularly immense though, and the sheer numbers of them overwhelm positions nearby. Titus briefly considers sounding a retreat from the world in general, but decides he ultimately must stand firm to try and rescue this world and continue the reclamation, and his sense of duty won't allow him to let this mysterious new threat suddenly become an enormous thorn in the side of Ultramar. A desperate request for aid is sent out, and elements of the Ultramarine 4th Company nearby fighting Orc pirates are dispatched to reinforce Titus. They will take several days to arrive though, and the Ultramarines planet side muster their might to stop the front lines collapsing. Two assault groups headed up by Gadriel and Matoris are dealing with certain threats, and Titus dispatches an armoured force north to counter a major force that's closing in on the capital with a Nightbringer at its head, with his Space Marine forces deploying from repulsor tanks. These tanks appear to be no match for a shard of the living god of death, however. The Nightbringer slices one of them clean in two and blasts one with the gaze of death before causing it to crumple in on itself and cutting through entire squads of Space Marine elites with ease. The supporting forces manage to obliterate the Necron infantry formations nearby. As they take heavy casualties, the entire Necron assault force blinks out of existence, presumably phasing out to a place of safety, and have the damaged Necrons repaired. From the heraldry displayed on different assault groups, Titus realises that he's fighting two different groups of Necrons here. The ones issuing from most of the fortresses around the planet have the heraldry of Sotek dynasty Necrons, but the ones that seem to be streaming out of Site Umbra are a vast stream of destroyer-cursed Saracen dynasty Necrons making their way onto the planet from portals off-world. If they're going to have any hope of winning, Titus and his forces will need to return to Site Umbra and detonate that vortex bomb and stop the potentially endless stream of Necron reinforcements from taking the planet. Ultimately, Titus decides to muster all the Space Marine might that he has on the planet and put it into that one bold push, at the expense of leaving the First Grand Sprawl and the defence of the capital unsupported by Space Marines and left to the Astra Militarum forces there. Notably, the Admech under Archmagos Ox don't seem to have been helping with the defence efforts too much, merely taking up positions around the Forge Shrine and defending the Archmagos himself only. From the Necrons' point of view, Titus is correct in his assumptions. It seems that Nekrosor Ammentar has just finished converting a Zarrigan world far away and then streams through the portal array to surprise the Necrons of Novamagnor. Originally this world was a Sotek tomb world under Overlord Haskatep, and he had been entrusted with several powerful weapons available to the dynasty, though in particular for Ammentar. Chief amongst them was a particularly potent Catan Shard of the Nightbringer, entombed within a Tesseract vault, As Ammentar's destroyer forces surprised them, the Tomb World was only in the very earliest stages of awakening, Cryptex and Canoptech constructs getting the first legions of warriors and mortals ready to make sorties against the humans on the surface. They were no match for the surprise assault from the destroyers. The Haskatep and just a few of his guards were able to escape with the vault itself on their tomb ship, only to be mercilessly intercepted by Titus. Ammentar and his generals observed the Space Marines make planetfall, respecting them as a next-level threat that was going to be a challenge to overcome far beyond the planetary garrison, and going through a period of lucidity, he decided to lay a trap for the Space Marines, making the complex known as Site Umbra appear to be undefended to lure in the Marines for an easy victory, only to hit them with overwhelming force with a surprise ambush from the destroyers. It cost the Space Marine a great number of lives, and would very likely have been a gambit most destroyer lords would have been unable to imagine. Even so, though, a great number of Space Marines escaped, and from the whisperings in the Necrosor's mind, he knew that they somehow held his prize in the capital city, and decided to switch from subtlety to an all-out attack, flooding his legions forward through a hidden tunnel towards the capital, with an essentially endless stream of Zarakan Necrons making their way through the portals. The host on the far-flung world that he last conquered was immense indeed. The Nekrosor would lead the assault, and his second-in-command Lieutenant Nekrosor Ammentar commanded the defence of the tomb complex in his wake, focusing on the bigger picture and winning the day for the Necrons. Holed up in the Forge Shrine, Oct had been attempting to communicate with the mysterious device. Many of his servitors lay destroyed in attempting to communicate or pry open the Necron artifact, to the point where he was becoming frustrated with his prize perhaps eluding him, and attempted to interface with it directly. The attempt burnt out some of his communication circuits though, with a subtle defensive subroutine that he described as a techno-sorcerer's curse, its purpose eluding him. With their advanced sensor gear, the Skitarii under his command picked up the ongoing assault for the Necrons approaching the capital via that hidden tunnel, but at this point he felt no desire or ability to share this with the Imperial defenders. I was unsure whether or not this desire was due to being corrupted by the Necron artifact, or as a divine vision of the Omnissiah's will. He ultimately decided he would plan to deliver the artifact to the Necrons to open it for him, so he might better serve the entity inside. Titus's initial assault goes fairly well, deploying by Thunderhawk gunships and taking all Space Marines still able to fight alongside him. The might of the Second Company out in force, alongside a Redemptor Dreadnought and a Brutalis Dreadnought. He decides to approach Site Umbra through one of the secondary Necron sites, fighting his way through the slightly disorganised but nonetheless bloodthirsty Guardians there. The Marines take further casualties, though are able to break through. As that goes ahead, the Nekrosor assaults the First Brand Sprawl in earnest, surging out of the tunnels to overrun the nearby Hive City, essentially a vast horde of destroyers, flayed ones, and crazed Necron warriors, cutting through and butchering everything they touch. Fleet elements unable to support properly due to the clouds above, and precision strikes with attack craft are able to inflict some good kills on the Necrons, but only small injuries to the sheer vastness of the host. Ammentar cuts through a Lehman Russ Punisher, peeling back the metal to rip the crew apart one by one, before jumping to execute a Commissar and butcher his Ogren bodyguards. At the last gambit to turn the tide and break the back of the Necron assault, Governor Garrow deploys a Baneblade to the fighting alongside her elite guard. The guns briefly make themselves felt, though Ammentar is able to slink into ambush position, dropping down and butchering the guard. The Baneblade crew hesitates to engage with quite so many friendlies nearby, and that's all the distraction that's needed for a Scorpet Lord to charge down the side of the tank, cut straight into it, and start to chop its way through the insides of the battle fortress, putting the mighty tank out of action. With Ox now corrupted, physically as well as spiritually, the Skitarii forces around the Forge Shrine are basically out of action, reacting very sluggishly or even not at all to the encroaching Necrons. Some of them fight back, and some just allow themselves to be overrun, waiting for commands from Ox that aren't coming. Sensing his prize is close, the Nekrosor enters the Forge Shrine. Ox bows down to him, and requests that he unshackle the Angel so they can serve it together. A request that's probably going to fall on deaf ears to the vast majority of Necrons out there, never mind Ammentar the literal murder machine. So of course he responds by grabbing the Tech Priest and throwing him into the churning mass of destroyers to be torn apart. Interfacing with the Tesseract Vault, Ammentar opens the thing, and the enormous shard of the Nightbringer rises from within, Archmagos Ox not even living long enough to realise that he'd been trying to commune with the wrong Star God. The arrival of this new Nightbringer shard spells certain doom for any remaining defenders in the Firstborn Sprawl, facing a new near all-powerful threat on top of the destroyers that were already overrunning their positions. Below the surface of the world, the Ultramarines fight on, fighting through an enormous tunnel against an endless wave of crazed Xenos murder robots. to get to the central chamber of site Umbra, this time approaching from below rather than above. Titus and Matoris both distinguish themselves on the front line, while Gadriel flies the colours of the company, and the chapter tech marines are able to triangulate the locations of the bomb, now sealed away in stasis by the Necron lieutenant, who marshals ad hoc forces that she can temporarily take control of and keep from Ammentar's destroyer madness for a bit. More space marines are brought low by the ad hoc but nonetheless mighty defence, and Titus realises that slaying the Nekrosor is probably going to cause the defence to fall apart. He charges her position along with his Terminator Guard and the Brutalis Dreadnought. The Brutalis is lain low by the Tachyon arrow from the Nekrosor herself. His Terminator bodyguard is slain and Gadriel injured, but Titus is able to run the Necron through with his chainsword, causing her to phase out and presumably gradually reanimate further away. With coherent resistance collapsed, they plant the Vortex Bomb, withdraw and escape by Thunderhawk gunship, and annihilates the primary Necron tomb complex, though it's cost the second company a great number of battle brothers to do so. As a result, the aftermath of the major battles are that the Nekrosor has overrun the capital and essentially killed everything there. Governor Garrow herself is slain, along with the garrison and most of the planet's senior command, but Titus has been able to take out the primary Necron portal on the world, so the Necrons that must be dealt with are now a more regular tomb world as opposed to an endless flood of reinforcements from another planet. Elsewhere, the Necrons have wiped out many major settlements, but two of the most important have managed to hold out. Legate Minervus has managed to win a great victory with the Ultramar Defense Auxilia, to the point where there's a significant amount of force ready to take the fight to the remaining Necrons where needed. If the Nekrosor had remained there, the fate of the planet would probably still have been sealed, but it seems that Ammentar, along with his generals and the Nightbringer shards that were leading the way in each attack, have all vanished off-world, apparently making their exit through a much smaller shadowy portal in one of the other complexes. He still estimates that the remaining forces on the world should be enough to overwhelm the defenders, and even if not, his main prize in the Nightbringer has been seized, and it's more important to keep this horror rolling or another tomb world. With the forces that he has left, and the remaining Ultramarines redeployed and rearmed, Titus is happy that he's going to be able to keep the Necrons to a stalemate until the reinforcements from the 4th Company arrive and they can start to reclaim the world and more properly incorporate it into the 500 worlds of Ultramar. Overall, for this particular battle's impact on the grand scheme of things in Warhammer 40k, it doesn't really feel like the actual fight for Novamagnor is necessarily the single most important. I feel like the lore in the 500 worlds book perhaps has more impact for the sort of footing that it puts the Space Marines on, Ultramarines pushing out in the wider galaxy on all sides. I feel like the lore of Nekrosor Ammentar is really quite a fun idea as well. Pretty much a creepy Necron plague that's able to fall upon a tomb world, convert it to their Great Destroyer plague, or with the background potential to maybe do something seriously major in Warhammer 40k if something major does happen with the Nightbringer and it's able to be restored to an entity with its own agency and power within the setting, as opposed to Pokeball Catan shards unleashed as weapons of war. I'm maybe a bit skeptical as to how fast Games Workshop chooses to progress that narrative though. Sort of feels like the thing that's a cool idea for the Nekrosor to be going around and doing. That also feels like the sort of thing that they might say that he's doing in the background, and then perhaps not revisit the concept for years to come, or maybe never in a meaningful plot progression style kind of way. I guess we'll see on that front though. Having the Ultramarines being the main aggressors in a campaign I think is interesting enough. Obviously Imperium goes on the offensive plenty of the time, though perhaps for more Ultramarine stories they might tend to be on the defensive, either in the Plague Wars or Hive Fleet Behemoth or the 4th Tyrannic War. I might kind of feel like they're setting them up for some sort of major next level threats to go and attack the newly expanded Ultramar, perhaps when plenty of the chapters are rather depleted. I did quite like the way that we had a Cult of the Dragon Admech Tech Priest crop up too. I feel that link between the Admech and the Void Dragon presumably beneath Mars feels like one of the slightly more unsettling and major plot lines that Games Workshop could go down in Warhammer 40k. Though Archmage's Oct in particular seems to be a next level failure, even by Admech standards, of choosing to play around with exotic tech they don't understand. Besides perhaps core specifically, that does seem to be the major theme of the Admech, often cropping up in stories to cause more harm than good, because some tech priest is going radical. Oct really fails kind of ridiculously hard in this one though, managing to recover a Tesseract Vault but not even realising that it's the wrong Catan in there, and then not even being able to open the thing, to the point where he's basically incapacitated by the Necrons, and then expects to do some kind of deal with the Necrons from a place of weakness, where probably just about every Necron would execute him at that point, never mind Nekrosor Ammentar, who's probably the single worst Necron that you could possibly try and treat with. As stories go, I think for a self-contained series of little battles, this one was at least a fairly well done one compared with some of the ones that Games Workshop's done in the past. It had a few twists and turns and a few cool moments, broadly made some fairly logical sense besides whatever Oct was trying to do, even if maybe the more galactic impact things are the ones that are built around the setting as opposed to this individual battle. In the book they did feel like there were a few other fun teasers. Lionel Johnson gets a mention that's already been talked about a fair bit at this point, seeming like it's a setup between a long-awaited meeting of the Primarchs, and there's also a mysterious inquisitorial threat as well, which I think also might be a teaser. Let me know your thoughts on the story down in the comments though, and feel free to point out any other fun things I might have missed. That's about it for this one though. As mentioned, a big thank you to WarMag for sponsoring the video earlier. If you want to take a look over their magnetic supplies great and small, there'll be links down in the video description. If you've been enjoying the videos, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I keep the videos coming just about every day, usually a bit more focused on models or gameplay, unless Games Workshop's, but it's fun to check in on the current lore as well. I'll hopefully aim to make some similar ones to this to cover some of the other End Edition campaigns once they're out. If you'd like to support the channel, Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description. Channel patrons get a few advantages, seeing occasional videos early, occasional votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link's in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.